Fort Myers native Beverly Bass feels at home in the cockpit. She flew into history as the first woman captain of a commercial plane at American Airlines and only the third female pilot there. For her, September 11th, 2001 began as a normal day at work.
Well, we were on the other side of the Atlantic in Paris at Charles de Gaulle Airport and preparing for our 10-hour flight back to Dallas. And it was actually a training mission because the co-pilot was on his first trip in the 777, and I was the instructor pilot. And so we took off. It was an abnormally beautiful, cloudless day. It's rare that you can cross the North Atlantic without a lot of cloud coverage. And that day, it was just magnificent. And we were right in the middle of the North Atlantic, westbound. We had just finished our lunch, or we're in the middle of our lunch or something. And we heard on our aircraft radios that one of the towers had been hit by an aircraft. And of course, your first thought as an airliner is it American? Because we had no idea who it was or whose airline it was associated with. And when they said the word terrorism, I was honestly so naive. I thought terrorism was something that happened somewhere else in the world.
Beverly and her co-pilot knew they'd have to land somewhere else when New York airspace shut down, and then eventually U.S. airspace closed. They figured they'd end up landing in Canada, like Montreal or Toronto.
When we reached 50 degrees west longitude, which is where we come in contact with Gander on every normal North Atlantic crossing westbound, they called us and they said, American 49, land your airplane immediately in Gander, Newfoundland. Well, that was not what we were thinking we were going to be doing, but we plugged it in the computers and we went to Gander. And when we were on final approach and I looked out, it was just a sea of airplanes. I'd never seen so many wide-body airplanes parked on every piece of concrete they had.
Beverly's plane was number 36 out of the 38 wide bodies to touch down that day in Gander. With few details on what was happening in New York, Beverly and her passengers had no idea how long they'd be on the ground.
We got parked and the Canadian officials came on board and said, you won't be getting off till tomorrow. And it was 10:15 in the morning on September 11th. So we were on the airplane 28 hours.
Some passengers had cell phones, making calls to home to find out what was happening in the States. But with no way to charge those phones and definitely no airplane TV, Beverly, her crew, and passengers were just sitting and waiting.
Now, what we were able to listen to was the BBC on the aircraft radios. So we were able to get London's version as to what was happening in the US. But that was it. That was our only contact with the outside world.
The next morning, all 7,000 crew and passengers were able to get off their planes, nearly doubling Gander's population of 9,400. The people of Gander were just as shocked as anyone by what was unfolding on the news, so they focused on the situation in front of them, helping these strangers who had come from away.
We walked into the terminal, which was just astounding because even though the airport is large, the runways are fabulous. The terminal itself is quite small, but it was lined with tables of hot food, snacks, fruit, desserts, brownies, everything you could think of. And since we got off so early in the morning, it was evident to me that every stove in Gander had to be on all night long. And they had literally made enough food to feed every single passenger when we got off the airplane. They actually handed us a plastic bag, and it was a little bit like Halloween. You just went around the tables and threw whatever food item in your bag that you wanted. And that was probably the first time that I realized we had landed in a very unique place. I didn't know if that would happen everywhere.
Crews were spread across all 500 of Gander's hotel rooms. Passengers were divvied up, staying in schools, churches, even homes. Any space really that could hold people.
They had to use the school buses to get everybody off, and the school bus drivers were on strike. But every single one of them came off in order to transport all of us. As many as 10 people were in people's homes, and nobody spoke the same language. And people were actually scattered throughout Gander and the surrounding communities within a 200-mile radius.
The kindness of the Ganderites, though, didn't stop there. Beverly says passengers were actually able to go to local stores, even Gander's Walmart, and take anything they needed without paying.
And I remember one time the radio announcer, he said, if you have any spare rolls of toilet paper, would you please bring them to the hockey center? And it was like 30 minutes later, he had to come back on and say, stop bringing toilet paper. We don't have room for it anymore. I mean, it was the call to duty that was like no other.
For 5 days, Gander's residents not only welcomed passengers and crew members with open arms, they showed immense compassion and generosity during one of the darkest times in American history.
There was a little bit of survivor guilt because we lived an amazing 5 days during that time, while, gosh, so many other families and people were suffering like never before. So you felt a little guilty about that. When I left Gander on September 15th, I remember looking at my crew and saying, I just want the whole world to know about Gander. I want everybody to know how we were treated so beautifully when our country was suffering through the worst tragedy in American history. I just want everybody to know.
Yet, during those 5 days in Gander, life back at home had changed quickly.
And then we had no idea what to expect when we got home. And I think the most surprising thing to me was when our families all met us at the airport with flowers and balloons, and all the controllers said, welcome home. I mean, it was very emotional. And when we drove home, I was shocked to see that every car had an American flag hanging on the window. There was an American flag in every front yard, and nobody had prepared me for that. I felt so horrible for the crew members who were lost that day, and of course, the rest of the people. And you couldn't help but put yourself in that position. You knew what it was like to be in the cockpit with your seatbelt on, your shoulder harnesses on. And the pilots were defenseless. They couldn't even turn around and defend themselves.
Safety procedures on planes for both crew and passengers have evolved a lot, with many changes to ensure pilots in the cockpit are protected. And even though Beverly was flying to the U.S. that day, she says she wasn't deterred from continuing to fly.
I called crew scheduling. I said, I want to go on one of the first flights. And they said, no, we think you should take a couple of days off. I said, okay. So I did. I took a few days off and then I flew again. I was never going to let the terrorists ruin what I loved so much and had spent a lifetime preparing for and doing.
But in the years following 9/11, less people were flying, and the fear of a terrorist attack was growing. The aviation industry took a big hit, with many of the big players like American Airlines filing for bankruptcy.
I took a 37% pay cut that I never recovered from because I retired in 2008. I flew for 7 years after 9/11. But then with the onset of us threatening bankruptcy, our retirement was tied to the viability of the airline. So about 400 of us left early.
Today, Beverly is 69 years old, and she's still doing what she loves, flying a private jet around the world. And her daughter Paige wanted to follow in her mother's footsteps as a pilot.
We were at my son's soccer game, and she said, now, boys play soccer and girls fly airplanes, right? And I said, that's right. You're exactly right. Boys play soccer and girls fly airplanes.
However, that dream started to fade after 9/11.
She knew about the pay cut. She knew about a lot of my friends who lost their jobs. And so her desire to fly waned, and she decided she wanted to be a plastic surgeon.
She went to college to prepare for a career in medicine, but just before going to med school, that dream to fly was sparked again.
So one day we were driving to lunch, and she said, I think I might want to fly. So I took her to the airport, got her a demo flight, and 6 weeks later, she was a pilot.
Beverly is a very proud mom, sharing that her daughter has flown stars like Rihanna and even Maroon 5. But what she's most proud of is her daughter's latest achievement.
As a matter of fact, she got hired by United, American, and Delta. And on September 8th, she will start training with American. So the legacy lives on, and I will be passing my wings down to her.
Starting to fly with American just days before September 11th, Beverley does have concerns, just like any mom would.
I flew many times after 9/11, on 9/11. And certainly the first year, I think a lot of us were a little bit anxious. We wanted to get through that day without a repeat. And then subsequent years, it was just kind of another day. This year worries me. Our unrest in Afghanistan is troubling, very troubling.
But she also knows one thing for sure. There's kindness left in this world. Just look at the people of Gander.